Oftentimes, many of you reach out and say, how do you find the guests that you find? And oftentimes I have many people who reach out to me. I have a list right now, probably 50 people long, who have requested to be on the podcast. And sometimes I stumble over guests that I think would be amazing. And today was no exception. So Tom Rosshirt was, I should say, a speechwriter. He was an amazing speechwriter during the Clinton Gore years. And he has an incredible new book out called Chasing Peace. And I think I talk about this a little in the podcast, but I stumbled upon his work through Maria Shriver had posted on him. And I loved the name, the title, and everything that he was talking about. And the conversation proved to be validating that my intuition was correct. This was an incredible interview where Tom just discusses his struggles with more physical health issues, but mental health issues that manifested in physical health, and how he was able to use spirituality to rewire his brain. It's an amazing deep dive into his life, his experiences, and the power that we all have to change our thoughts, which then can physically change our responses to our situation. Take a listen. I know you're going to love it. We just had an awesome conversation, an awesome connection, and a really deep dive into what is healing for people. So with that, here's my conversation with Tom Rosshirt.
We need at our table of awareness the logician, but equally we need the intuitive, we need the mystic.
I almost died. I was allowed to go to the very precipice of death, of life and death, and look over the edge. And I was allowed to behold what was there and allowed to come back. Most people aren't.
When we talk about being aligned with ourself or being aligned with our soul or hearing our higher self, that's really what we're talking about, is being connected to that divine part of ourself, that light-filled part of us that is connected to God energy, that is connected to everybody here and every experience we've ever had.
If more doctors, more professionals can open up to use intuitive gifts in their work, that's really important.
Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, mediumship, near-death experiences, consciousness, and what it all means. Welcome, Tom, to Life, Death, and the Space Between.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I think I came across your new book, Chasing Peace, on Instagram. I think maybe Maria Shriver posted about it. And I was captivated not just by the title, but a story of breakdowns, breakthroughs, and the spiritual power of neuroscience. And the spiritual power of neuroscience is what really caught my attention, because I'm fascinated by where spirituality meets science. And you lived that experience. But can you start with, I had so many questions written down about where we wanted to start. A little bit about your story, because you have a pretty powerful background that you come from. And even in saying that, I'm aware of like the impact that has historically had on you, to hear people say he was this or he was that, like the self-image that you talk about in the book. But I think it's an important context for people to understand.
So let me talk a little bit about how I get sick and how I got well, and I'll try to make it short, because I tend to run the clock on these questions. So when
I give you like a wrap it up?
Say bring this to a close. Bring me off stage. So I was about 50, and I was working hard in a stressful job, and suddenly started getting all kinds of stress-based symptoms. A lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, memory issues. I woke up one day and had really striking, frightening memory lapses. And I was on the road later that day, driving, thinking, how did I get here? And then later that day, I was going through a cupboard and found a dish of vegetables I thought I had put in the fridge. And I went to the doctor, and this began a string of doctor visitations and tests and quasi-diagnoses that led me to search everywhere for what the heck is going on with me. And I went to websites upon websites. I did symptom checkers, which are never good for me from an anxiety point of view. And I began to identify, oh, I'm reacting to mold, or oh, I'm reacting to chemicals, and I'm reacting to these kinds of foods. And I began this campaign of avoidance, thinking I will get better when I avoid the things that are making me sick. But I didn't get better. I got worse. I got more anxious. Until 6 years into this, after visiting so many doctors, I got sort of a consensus recommendation. You need to move out of your house because you got a 100-year-old house. It's in a humid area of Washington, D.C. You're reacting to environmental allergens and other things. You need to get out of there, let your body settle down, and then maybe you can move back. So my family was completely baffled by me. They didn't understand it. Nobody else was reacting to any of these things. And they sort of sighed, took a deep breath, and said, okay, if this is what you have to do. So I found an apartment maybe 30 minutes away, and I lived there, and it was newly built and had no volatile organic compounds and special paint and different kind of carpet. And I went there with a hypoallergenic mattress and all of this stuff. 9 months into that, I was worse. And I ended up having 2 meetings with psychiatrists who looked at brain scans that I had. And the first psychiatrist said, yeah, your brain is not exactly a train wreck, but given this array of scan pictures, if you were a normal government worker, I would recommend disability because it's not looking very healthy. And I'm thinking, you're telling me it's not a train wreck, yet you're a psychiatrist. You must know that my brain only hears your brain train wreck.
Right.
Anyway, that was
can you
just
speak
one.
a little bit, because this is really important for people to hear, and I talk about this a lot actually in my course, is that the brain doesn't differentiate the negatives, right? It just hears like you train wreck.
Right. Well, I defer to you and your expertise on those points. I can testify to my own experience, which was I did not feel good coming out of that meeting, right? And then I had another psychiatrist who looked at a different brain scan, and she just went point by point in my brain and identified all the places where on a percentile basis I had a lot of brain atrophy. And she said, let me tell you, this is sad. I mean, I'm glad I'm not there having to tell you this. And I said, time out. You're glad you're not face-to-face telling me what the condition of my brain is? And she said, yeah, because no way to mince words, this is really looking bad. So this was 9 months into my recovery where I was doing everything I knew to do, including disrupting my life to move out of my house, and I had hit a dead end. And so let me just bring this part to a close and say, the real moral of the story here, the big problem with my plan, the big flaw in my plan of I'm going to move out to this apartment, I'm going to do better there, is that I was bringing my fear with me. And as I constructed it, Dr. Amy, I thought, okay, I'm moving away from danger. That's how I constructed it. The reality was I was running away from fear. And running away from fear increases fear, and fear was the cause of my illness. It wasn't just fear made me unhappy, but fear made me sick. It was generating symptoms that were really very, frankly, impossible to live with. And so that was the lesson that I got. And I got a breakthrough from someone who pointed me toward neuroplasticity. But the fact was, when I left my house to go live in that apartment, I was bringing a particular fear response with me. And then I was introduced to neuroplasticity and did those approaches, which we can talk about. And I learned a different fear response. And then I came back home and threw away all the supplements, all the chelating agents, quit the diet, dumped the air purifier, did all those special precautions, dropped them. The only change that I kept was I had a different response to fear, and I had a whole new life.
So this is so fascinating on so many levels. One, because I think historically neuroplasticity was believed. We believed that our brains basically stopped being able to reconnect and grow around. It used to be like 18 to 20, then it was 25. But now what we're really starting to see is that you can, there is no point at which you can stop rewiring your brain, that you can change the way you experience things, the way the neurons fire. There's a lot of work done. Joe Dispenza does this work. There's a lot of work by other people who are looking at, Dan Siegel, I believe, does a lot of this work around neuroplasticity and the ability for the brain to rewire. But what was your experience? Because you went to this house, this brand new house, thinking, okay, everything's going to maybe be better now.
Right.
But this unconscious fear that you had of something is very wrong with me, and here's the list of a million things I need to do to change this. And I think so often, so many people right now who have any sort of illness are seeking what are all the things that can be done. And there's so much that's getting thrown at us, right? For you, it was like, you have Lyme, you have mold, there's, let's detox, let's, give you binders to get the mold out and all of this.
Yeah.
How did you get to the point where you were like, this is, because I also want to be careful that people don't always, there's a healthy balance here between what is psychological and what are we doing to ourselves with our own mind and what are real physiological medical issues. So how were you able to differentiate those?
Well, this is absolutely in the book, and you look in the first chapter and you talk about back pain, and the experts I refer to on that and the neuroplastic treatment of back pain are very clear about you got to explore for tissue damage, you got to explore for structural damage and tissue injury. But if that doesn't show up as something distinctive and causative, then you start to explore, does this start in neural circuits of the brain brought on by fear and a sense of danger? So the miracle for me, and this was the breakdown, when I talked to that psychiatrist who said, boy, am I glad that I'm not there to tell you how awful your brain is. At that moment, I was in breakdown, and I describe breakdown as my story didn't work. I say in the book that we all go for the self-image model of happiness. We think there's somebody that I need to be in the world, and if I am that, and people say that I'm that, then I am happy. And so I came to the end of any hope of an explainable way I could recover my life. All my story was finished. And what happens when your story fails is you become open. There's a line in my book where Robert Johnson, the Jungian therapist, described Parzival and his pursuit of the Holy Grail. And he said that the quote was, 20 years, the arrogance had been beaten out of him by 20 years of fruitless searching. So the breakthrough comes from the breakdown, because the breakdown gives you some humility and opens your mind to, maybe I don't know what's best. So what happened was I got a call from someone who said, would you like to join a support group for people with your stuff, mold, illness, chemical sensitivities? I said, absolutely. And they said, but let me caution you, this group is not about trying to get the best air purifier, the chelating agents, or the binders. You're very fluent in this, I can tell. But it's not about any of that. And it's not about diet. It's about rewiring your brain. And my interest jumped 10,000-fold. And I said, I absolutely want this. Tell me, what's the book? What's the routine? And I read Annie Hopper's book, Wired for Healing. I read it in a day. I ordered her DVDs. I joined the support group. I eventually went to an in-person training. But the critical thing here was reversing avoidance. So instead of, I'm reacting to mold, I got to get away from mold. I'm reacting to that chemical smell, I got to get away from that. Annie Hopper, the author and my first teacher, she had this issue and solved it herself, cured it herself. But her reasoning was, I walk down the detergent aisle in the grocery store and I think I'm having a brain hemorrhage and everyone else is fine. So it's not in the stimulus, it's in my response. And she left her home, camped for a while, went to live on a houseboat, but had a stack of books on neuroscience and read them all and retrained her brain and then started this program. So for me, it was, wow, the answer is not to get away from these things that I think are dangerous. The thing is, turn around and face the fear. This is the stimulus. It's not the cause of the problem. The cause is in your brain response. So retrain your brain response.
So how is it, and I don't know if you know the answer to this question,
Right.
But how is it different than traditional exposure and response prevention therapy, right? Which is usually that's anxiety based, but that's ultimately what you're talking about here at the core, right? Fear is anxiety.
Right.
What were you so fearful of that then you faced? And it's exposure and response prevention, right? We expose ourselves to that
Right.
thing that we fear most, and we tolerate the feeling that's associated with that in some way rewires our brain to say, okay, I no longer need to fear that stimulus. Like, it's not scary to me anymore. Whatever that
Right.
is, spiders flying, self-image, right, for you. And I want to talk a little bit more too about what your image was, what your self-image was, how you were seen in the world, and where that breakdown happened for you.
Right, right. So as far as I know, there's no difference in what I'm talking about at incremental exposure. And I think that that's what's magical about now, is that neuroplasticity and the understanding of this behavior of the brain has opened us up to so many approaches that can reduce fear. And it strikes me, and I write this in the book, I believe that fear is one of the greatest causes of suffering in the world, one of the greatest causes of physical and emotional illness. And reducing fear is one of the great causes of healing. So we've got a bunch of really intelligent, engaged, dynamic healers who are seizing on these principles of brain science and often marrying them with well-known principles of psychology and deep truths of spiritual practice to generate some of the best healing approaches that we've ever had. So in many ways, of course, it seems like a very dark time for society, for humanity. On the other hand, there are many healing methods that are in high demand now and are being brought by scientists, psychologists, and spiritual teachers.
One of the questions I get the most often is, can you refer me to a spiritual therapist? And my question back is, what does that mean to you? And people often respond with someone who's familiar with mediumship, near-death experiences, what happens after we die. Maybe they know astrology or numerology. And so I created what seems like isn't out there, a course for therapists to learn about spiritually informed therapy. My course starts June 16th. It's going to be every Monday from 12 to 1:30. And it is specifically for therapists. So if you are a master's level therapist, unfortunately, anybody can take it, but master's level therapists can get continuing education credits for it. There'll be 10.5 continuing education credits. We'll meet for 7 weeks and we'll discuss things like the neuroscience of spirituality, spiritually transformative experiences, spiritual techniques that you might want to think about integrating into your clinical work, spiritual bypassing, spiritual emergence, spiritual emergencies, Jung, signs, synchronicities, the ethics and cultural implications of spirituality. I am so excited to be able to bring this course to you. I feel like it is exactly what is needed right now. And I feel like I have finally found my home in this space. So if you want to join me, check out my website, dramyrobbins.com. There'll either be a waitlist or a link to sign up for the course. We're still working on some of the details of that, but if at the very least get on the waitlist or sign up for the course now, there will be early bird discounts available to you. So make sure you get on my email list as soon as possible. I am so excited to be training the next level of therapists in this space. So I look forward to seeing you there. So what was your self-image and where did things kind of get disrupted for you? Because you were trucking along pretty good there for a while.
Yeah. So I don't want to make it entirely about my self-image because I think the value of the book is that these discoveries are universal experiences. And so I talk the point that resonates most with my readers, as far as I've gotten the feedback, is this idea of the self-image model of happiness. And I get into this on, I think, page 47, where I begin to describe it in full, and I hint at it before then. But the self-image model of happiness is something we're born into. This is how we seek happiness. We want good feelings. We want to distance ourselves from bad feelings. And we quickly conclude that if I am this person, this kind of person doing these kind of things, I get good feelings out of this. And if I can get people, if I can be this person with these attributes, with these skills, and I get people to tell me that story back to me, and I'm able to achieve it without enormous strain, then I'm basically happy. I've reached some kind of equilibrium. That's how we all start out. But there's a flaw in it from the start, which is when I say, I want to be this, and I don't want to be that, I've already split myself in two. Because the self-image is really, it's a way to hide from the feelings we're afraid of. And so all the things about me, all the habits that I have, all the thoughts that I have, bring up response from my environment and feelings in myself that make me feel awful, bad, and I want to get away from them, escape them. So I take refuge from all these feelings I want to avoid, all the feelings that I'm afraid of. I take refuge by creating this self-image. And then it becomes embedded for me. I've got to be this. It's not that people have to be this to be happy, but I told myself, I programmed myself. This is the dark side of neuroplasticity, right? We condition ourselves in harmful ways before we learn to recondition ourselves in helpful ways. But I'm convinced I have to be this to be happy. I have to be a terrific speechwriter. I have to deliver excellence on deadline every time. I can never miss a deadline. I can never make a flaw. I can never embarrass the person who's using my words from the podium. There are all these things that I insisted I had to do. I have to have. And so I was obsessive about perfectionism for me is, well, what is it that I'm trying to perfect? The self-image. And so I'm trying to perfectly be the self-image. So there are all these other parts of me that I'm denying or hiding from or shoving down. And so I've often said, I've never missed a deadline. And now, is that a point of pride or a cry for help? It's both, but I'd underscore the cry for help, because when you're building up that kind of expectation for yourself, then whenever that self-image is threatened, it's proof that it's evidence of anxiety. The anxiety is coming because that self-image, which is your protection from bad feelings, is now under threat.
Right. So the ability to perhaps miss a deadline and tolerate the feeling around missing a deadline is really where the growth occurs. And in the avoidance of missing the deadline, you're not allowing yourself to grow in any way.
That emphatically, yes. And so here's one thing that's a little bit odd. It's almost, what is your tolerance for embarrassment?
Right, because, for shame, right? You talk a lot about Brene Brown in the book, too.
Yeah. If you can allow that in, here's sort of an example. If I have a self-image that I'm a really good writer, and I write a book, and
Can you just tell people for a minute what you use? Well, do you still do?
My writing, right, yeah. I fell in love with political speech writing when I was 8 years old and was brought to tears by a speech I heard on TV at a national political convention. And then ended up working on Capitol Hill. I worked in the Senate. I worked for a member of Congress. I worked for a governor as a speechwriter, and also as a press aide, as a press secretary. So worked for a governor of a state, worked for the state House Speaker, and also for Vice President Gore, I worked as a foreign affairs spokesman. And then for President Clinton, I was a national security speechwriter. So these were, when your self-image is under pressure, the pressure often depends on how high are the stakes, how much is the stress, what's the power of the people watching and evaluating you. So that was a high level of stress, and it set me up.
Really? I can't imagine why.
it set me up to break down. But even then, the self-image was working for me, because when the image of who you want to be aligns with the feedback you're getting from the people around you, it's the buzz, right? That's the buzz we want. But that's not peace.
Right. No.
That buzz is not peace. It's the opposite of peace.
So do you feel like in the title Chasing Peace, at that point, it's so interesting. Do you feel like you were chasing peace by chasing the buzz? And so the buzz at that point brought you peace? Or do you feel like the peace you were chasing was knowing that was ultimately going to break down and you were going to need to find peace in some other way?
No, I did not anticipate the breakdown.
Okay.
Honestly, I thought that I was like on an airliner that was taking off and would steadily keep climbing and keep climbing. I'd keep happier and happier. But that's not what happens with the self-image model. And so I was pushing hard on that self-image model, working hard to make it work for me. But ultimately, the breakdown happens, and the breakdown I describe is, well, the self-image breaks down because evidence appears that you're not everything you're saying you are. And the body starts breaking down because you're exhausting yourself trying to promote and defend that self-image. And then your whole plan for happiness breaks down because that's all you know, and you're trying it, and you're achieving it or coming close to it, and you're miserable. So that breakdown is how it appeared for me, and I did not anticipate it.
Well, and as you're talking and as I was reading the book, it's exhausting. Like I'm just listening and I'm like, oh my God, that level of needing to constantly climb. That's a great image of that. Like airplane is like at some point you're going to get tired. But if everything you're doing is to preserve the self-image of who I am, then there's no time to take your foot off the gas, because if your perception is, if I take my foot off the gas, then people are going to potentially see me for who I really am. And then they're going to recognize that I'm not who they thought I was. And then the whole house of cards comes tumbling down.
Right. Yeah. I spent a whole lot of effort trying to be the guy who never makes mistakes. And boy, the double checking and triple checking, and the anxiety for me was high. When I was writing for Vice President Gore, particularly in 1999, he was known, he was going to be the Democratic candidate for president. And so I knew that everything that I wrote was going to be scanned by expert political operatives on the other side looking for the mistake or the gaffe that would cost him political points. And so that kind of pressure is a big strain. But I don't want to make it about my particular job. We all are trying to be something super special and often resorting to perfectionism, because when the self-image takes a shot, we have a number of options. But one of them is we just double down. We go back to the mask. We work harder. And sometimes, if I have a grandiose self-image that I'm really not, and something appears to show that I'm not, I can either accept my embarrassment, bear the embarrassment of a broken self-image and confess, yeah, I'm not all the things that I want to be all of the time, or I double down on the self-image, attack the person who's attacking me, send out a bunch of lies, drink up whatever potion is going to give me the energy I need to keep at it. So that's the continuous challenge of trying to be this self-image.
So my question in all of this is what is the place where you can be excellent at what you do and also be human? Like, where do those two pieces come together? And have you been able to, obviously you're not a speechwriter anymore for Clinton and Gore. They're long gone. But what do you imagine that person now would look like in that position where the stakes are still just as high? So how do you, and I'm asking for anybody right now who's listening, who's in a very intense, and, we all have our different perceptions of what's intense, right? Like it could be, for me, it could be like, I never can make a mistake in my practice. I can never say the wrong thing, because if I say the wrong thing, then someone will decompensate and then I'm responsible for that. And then they're, not well because of something I said, right? Everybody has their own version of what that potentially looks like. Where is the peace in all of that for each of us? How do we find that?
So that's an awesome question. And for me, it's that part of what I was trying to do in this book is give clarity to this idea of the first half of life and the second half of life. So Richard Rohr, who I revere, he writes about this in Falling Upward. It's a deeply Jungian concept. And so the first half of life I describe as you're trying to achieve the self-image. Mm-hmm. The second half of life is when it breaks down. The self-image breaks down, your body breaks down, the path to happiness breaks down, and then you start dissolving the self-image. You start to let it go. So happiness is trying to become who you want to be. Peace is becoming who you are. Happiness is trying to get what you want. Peace is wanting what you get. And how you know that you've flipped the script is, for example, what is the role of the self-image? So let's say that I am deep in the first half of life. I'm clinging to my self-image as a great writer, not just a good writer. And I write a book and I look online and I go through Goodreads and someone says, this is utterly simplistic and misses the book completely. Now, what my reaction in the first half of life is, and when I'm in the self-image model of happiness, where I'm addicted to my self-image, I hate that person. I try to find out who they are. I want to blast them online. I want to find flaws and tell myself all the reasons they're idiot, right? If I'm in the second half of life and I'm looking, if I'm even looking at what people say about the book, right, and I see a criticism, if I'm curious about it, or even better, somewhat amused, then that shows that I'm not, and I'm trying just as hard to write the truth and write it well. But if I find an attack on my writing and I'm able to be curious about it, then I have lost my attachment to the self-image or reduced it. And so I'm still in the world, I'm still contributing, but I'm lighthearted about it. It doesn't really matter. It's not that I'm dismissive of it. I'll take it in. This is curious. There must be some truth in this, but I don't get upset about it. And so that's the difference between what happens as you're building up in the self-image and as you're dissolving the self-image.
So there's you talk in the book about sort of these stages you go through: anxiety, depression, crisis, addiction or addiction crisis, and then grace.
Grace, right.
That, it sounds to me like earlier on, and then my question is, does it always have to be this way? Like, do you believe that we have to have experienced those early on feelings of defining our self-image, or can we get to peace before midlife, let's say, right? When we tend to not care as much about what other people think or other people's opinions of us, there is that disillusion in some ways of, you talk about your ego, like this disillusion of like, it doesn't really matter. Like what, I remember when I got my first bad review of my podcast, like it stung a little bit. It definitely stung. Sure. I was like, "Ooh, ouch, that's not nice." It didn't send me into a tailspin, but I definitely perseverated on it more than I would like to admit.
Right. No, I'm there too.
And like, I recognize that one person's view of me doesn't define who I am and doesn't impact my image. Now, could I have gotten there when I was in my 20s? I'm not so sure, but does it have to be that way? Like, that's, can we instill in our young, I know you have younger kids, I have young kids. Can we instill in our kids, like, you don't need to have that image of yourself. Like, it's okay to experience rejection or failure or whatever, however that shows up.
I think that there are many skillful ways of doing the first half of life, which is to have a particular self-image that's reasonable, that's productive. Some people have a self-image where they want to be some crook, right? Some, leader of a gang or something like that, right? So you can do the first half of life in a responsible way. The question of whether because it's not just adapting your self-image or changing it or modifying it or going where it's affirmed and supported. It's the mechanism begins to dissolve. And so I don't know if that can happen before you hit a breakdown. Because I do believe we're born, as you know better than I do, we're young. We find that there are feelings and impulses that are universal, but they're frightening to us because if we express them, it will jeopardize relationships with people we love and need. And then hiding those feelings and pushing them down becomes not just a pattern for that relationship, maybe, but for all relationships, but that lives with us. So the self-image is, if I want to be something, it's because I want not to feel the feelings. That the self-image is really a refuge from, let's say I have feelings that I'm useless, nobody likes me, nobody would miss me, I don't have any talent of my brothers. All these feelings, if I have a self-image that I embrace, it's because that self-image is protecting me from these feelings. And so
Mm-hmm.
if there comes a point where I can feel all the feelings, then I'm in the second half of life, because the self-image is to keep me from feeling like if you did an interview with 10 Olympic gold medalists, I suspect you'd find in most of them a desire to run away from, I'm nothing special, I'm kind of useless, nobody cares about me. And then it takes refuge, they take refuge in, but I'm an Olympic gold medalist. And then people will. So I think it's ultimately a question of, that the self-image is really a game of trying to arrange our lives to avoid the feelings we're afraid of. And if peace, in the book I say the essence of peace is to be unafraid of any feeling. If we can really flip to where we're not navigating our lives to avoid unhappy feelings, then bang, we're in the second half. And if somebody can learn that in their 20s, then I genuflect to that person.
Seriously, little Buddhas.
Yeah.
I love that. The essence of peace is to avoid,
To be unafraid of any feeling.
unafraid of any feelings, right? To be, yeah. And I often talk about like being able to ride the waves, right? Like whatever feeling comes up, you're like, all right, I'm just going to surf. They call it urge surfing, or surfing the waves of feelings. And like that you can just surf that feeling, knowing it will.
Honestly, I think it's hard to find a higher measure of wisdom than that, to be able to absorb, accept any feeling. And if you look at Desmond Tutu's book of Forgiving, and I revere Desmond Tutu because he's this combination of spiritual leader and social justice warrior, and he will counsel us we can't get past the pain unless we feel it. And he was counselor to so many people who are victims of unspeakable tragedy. And he would say, look, the problem is that instead of placing our hands on our hearts and weeping for what we have lost, we raise our finger and shake our fist at the one who has harmed us. Instead of forgiving, we seek vengeance. And people would say, oh, you're just making me into a doormat. And I'm saying, you're not going to say that of the person who was the spiritual leader of the movement that ended apartheid. Right? So this is social justice force, but also spiritual power. And it comes down to, can you feel the feelings that come from being alive in a very imperfect world? But so I'm totally with you that riding the waves, that's the highest practice there is.
And how do you see spirituality? How do you define spirituality, and how do you see it fitting in all this? Because a lot of what I hear you talking about is very psychological, but I think we've separated the two in many ways, and it's really about bringing those two pieces back together again, I think, is where the magic and the healing happens.
Yeah. So I think spirituality, and I write about this in the chapter on grace, and I think grace is constantly bombarding us, trying to get access. Grace is, it's like we're swimming in an ocean of grace, and we're in this semi-impermeable container, and we won't let grace in. And it's
How do you
trying
define
to get in.
Grace? Can you define that for everybody?
Grace is sort of this spiritual ether. It's God, it's love, it's joy, it's truth. It is all those things.
It's acceptance. Like I think it's acceptance, right?
Yeah,
just accepting yourself for who you are.
Right. And so it seems to me that the spiritual part is when you sacrifice this tiny image of who you think you are and who you think you have to be, and you give it up. As scary as it is, and it's terrifying to give it up because it means losing control, right? The self-image gives us some control. We want to mold the world into the story we insist on. We want the world to be a particular way. And if we give up our self-image in our story and the world and creating a world that we want, only because it makes us comfortable and protects us from these unhappy feelings, if we give that up, then grace flows into us. And that is spirituality. That is the accomplishment of joy and peace and love. We become a channel for that. But as long as we're trying to navigate our own approach, as long as we see other people as potential people we can use or people who might be threats to us, and are sort of constantly calculating, we're never going to achieve grace. Grace is an opening. So that's how I see. Eckhart Tolle is quite clear about that. And Byron Katie also. What happens, we often ponder that state and we say, what's going to happen to me when I stop worrying about what's going to happen to me? And the answer
Such
is we're
freedom.
Right. We're just guided. And Katie says, my life, she's really radical in her pronouncement. She says, look, my life is not my business. I'm taking orders. I'm taking orders. And Eckhart says, my life is just consciousness unfolding. I make no plans. So at that point, you're absolutely guided. And one of the thoughts, and this is really beyond thought, it's beyond egotistical thought. But someone asked me once, but how are you going to know, how can you even protect yourself when you stop thinking? And I said, well, stand in front of your bathroom mirror and pick one leg up and watch what happens when you lose your balance. Immediately your body adjusts, correct? But you didn't tell it to do that.
Right.
It just knows to do that. So there's a whole area of intelligence that's beyond my scheming thought that rushes in to carry me along as soon as I stop relying on somebody's just my own, who am I going to be in the world?
Right. I think when you stop trying to muscle your way through.
Right.
It all, right? Like you're like, and then when you kind of back off and let it unfold, it unfolds. It has the potential to unfold beautifully.
That's right.
So once you went through this program with Annie, Annie Hopper, how quickly did things start to shift and change for you? Because you really had to, you don't just like go through the program and that's it, right? You really engaged with this new way of being in the world.
Right. So one of the things, she gives like 5 sets of directions for your new life, your new self. One of them was elevate your mood throughout the day. That was one. The other is catch the pathways of the past, catch your old habits. One is you go through and you identify what are the false messages from your brain you obey and believe. And to try to understand how to get out. So maybe for about 18 months, I did her exercise every day. And she said, do it 6 months. And I got to the end of 6 months, I go, why would anyone ever give this up?
Right.
Because I found that the false beliefs that I had about, if you eat this, you're going to be depressed for 3 days. And if you go here, you're going to have depression, anxiety. With all those false thoughts, when they started to stand down, there were a lot of other false thoughts that fell away with them. It was like, my kids should always obey me. Thoughts that just add stress. And so that's when I started feeling better than I had ever felt, I thought, okay, I think this self-directed neuroplasticity is spiritual practice. It's just taking false thoughts and dissolving them. So and I did that for about 18 months. And then I did some Byron Katie, and I did a lot of Byron Katie. Then I did, as I describe in the book, I worked with Dr. Howard Schubner, who works on neuroplastic pain, and Dr. Coughlin, Patricia Coughlin, wrote 3 or 4 books on intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy, which I thought was brilliant because it absolutely identified that what are my resistance to feelings? What were the ways in which I kept unhappy feelings or difficult feelings from coming to mind, that coming up to be felt? And so I worked on that. And then in the end, the meditation practice that I had from my 20s started working for me again. And I had found that when I was meditating with the original practice, I was suppressing stuff mightily. Like everything I thought, well, that's not very spiritual, I was shoving it down. And so the meditation practice that I started with was just observe everything with equanimity, don't react. And so for me, I was in my 20s, really a gunner, very much a first half of life kind of guy. And for me, don't react, I converted to don't make any outward expression of emotion.
Right. Don't feel.
And that's exactly right. And I got it. I'm totally backward.
Mm-hmm.
But then it came back around for me.
What does your life look like now? And what I love is that in this book, you talk about too, like all these different practices that you sort of incorporated in and made your own practice, which I think in so many ways is, as I see it, like there is no one path necessarily to healing. Like for some people, healing might be a binder and all of this, right? It might be supplements and it might be meditation and whatever it is, it's about finding those things that work to help you, that resonate with you. For some people, they might be like, that doesn't resonate with me, but this really does. And this is what transformed my life.
Exactly.
Because no matter how you cut it, you're rewiring your brain.
Right. And so the theme throughout the book, in my view, is fear and reducing fear, finding ways, and not just to separate yourself from fear, but actually to reduce your capacity for fear. So at one point in the book, I write about, I'm imagining myself walking through a tunnel of electrified fencing on my right, electrified fencing on my left, and I'm wearing a shock collar, just imagining this scene. And I don't know actually that this is what's going on, but I start wandering over to the right, and then the shock starts coming through, and I don't know this is what I'm doing, but I think I'd rather be over here in the center again, right? And then I wander toward the left, and then the shock starts coming, and I think, I think I'd rather be over here. And I don't understand that's what's going on is I'm feeling fear. And the fear is keeping me living my life in a narrow corridor. So the point isn't to get free by enduring shocks, but to reduce the electricity or to drop the shock collar. So I would say that's the pattern of my life since I started with Annie, and I changed my fear response. It's a gradual process, but it's a continuous practice. And so now what I'm doing, and I think this is probably the defining mark of progress for us who are trying to assess ourselves. And as a clinical psychologist better than others, how difficult it is to assess your own progress, because you want to believe you're getting better. You want to believe the efforts you're making are helpful.
Well, and often they're so small, right? Like the changes, I experience this certainly with my patients, is like I can often see their progress.
Right.
And reflect it back to them. But sometimes it's much more difficult for them to see their own progress, because the progress can be it can be very small, it can be incremental, or it can plateau for a while. And so people sometimes feel like, am I actually getting better, or am I the same as I was? And so that ability to say, wait, here's where you were and here's where you are, and this is what I see, can be really helpful for people.
Right. And so the measure that I use for myself, and I describe it in the book also, is, am I doing things I've never done before? Because that's a mark of the drop of fear. Am I doing things that I never did before, even though I'm doing them with some fear now, but before I never did them at all because the fear was so great? And am I now doing things I used to do with fear, but now doing them without any fear? So it's that gradual doing things that I've never done before, I think, is a pretty objective mark of, are you changing? Are you overcoming fear? Are you less in the grip?
And how did you know that what you were experiencing was fear? Like, what did you use as the barometer of that? Was there a feeling in your body you had? Was there diarrhea every morning before you went to work?
Yeah.
Was there pain in your?
It was just, for me, fear manifested as some combination of anxiety, depression, and especially aversion. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. How did I end up doing this? Why did I agree to do this? Why do I keep doing this to myself? Why do I agree? Right? And typically it would be around public events, public speaking, accepting an assignment, these kind of things that were performance heavy, like writing something that was going to be published or speaking in public in front of people. Those were areas that would trouble me. And my fear would manifest. And so now I'm doing them much more freely, with much less worry, and I still prep a lot, but it's less fraught.
So it sounds to me like there's an ease and a peacefulness by which you now live your life through rewiring your brain, and all the other symptoms that you were experiencing are gone.
All those other symptoms are gone. Right. All those other now. I'm 65 years old, and so my memory is not what it was. And so that was just something that would generate enormous fear for me in the past. And now, if I can't remember something, it's a trivial matter for me. So one of the ways I measure the intensity of my fear is, what is the extreme thing I will do to get away from that fear? And so remember, 6-7 years ago, I was afraid I was losing my mind. I was getting dementia, and that drove me to leave my family and go live in a new place. That's an extreme reaction to fear. Now, the same kind of fear will come, or the moment of a slippery memory, or I can't recall something, and it's a trivial matter. If there's a moment of anxiety, it passes quickly.
Well, Tom, this is such an incredible book. It reads beautifully. I read it in one day. Which I don't recommend because I was reading for like 3 hours, but it's really that good that you don't want to put it down. And I think I really found myself I'm always captivated by people's stories, particularly in this space, and kind of where you come from and how vulnerable you are and how open you share your experiences. So if people are curious about your book, your work, are you still doing speech writing? Like, what does your life look like today?
Yeah, I'm not doing speech writing. I'm working with the book and promoting the book, but I'm also working on a project that we're calling the Dignity Index, that I began with Tim Shriver, who is the chairman of Special Olympics. And we've started an organization which we hope will ease political divisions. And our approach is, we say that all the divisions that are caused in our society, in our country, are not from these grand global trends, the rise of social media, the decline of institutions. They're really treating each other with contempt when we disagree. And if we were to treat each other with dignity when we disagree instead, all these divisions start to melt, and we can solve our problems, and we can prevent violence, and we can come together to really handle. And it doesn't mean we have to agree with each other, and it doesn't mean we suppress our thoughts. We say what we think, but we say it in a way that encourages others to say what they think too. So I'm working on this, and these are two parts. So the book chasing piece is a little bit about inner peace, and Dignity Index is about social peace. So those are the ways I'm occupying.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I mean, God, that could be a whole other podcast topic. Like, I would love to have you on to talk about that, because
I'd love to come.
God. Yeah, this open. I think I just saw Tim. Was he at the Mental Health America conference? Do you know?
Very, very likely. Yeah, I'm not sure, but yeah.
Yeah, I think he spoke on addiction. I can't. Maybe
he might have. Yeah, I can't keep up with his speaking schedule.
Okay.
But yeah.
Because I think, gosh, like, how we, oh my God, I have so many thoughts on this, like how we are projecting our own feelings based on what someone else says and what that then makes us feel. And then we respond from there rather than what the other person is saying, right? We're like, we don't even hear what they're saying anymore. We hear our fear, and that fear takes over. And then we meet what they're saying with that fear.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So the good news is that people are so responsive to this idea of the Dignity Index, because it really is, we're saying what they're already thinking. There's got to be a better way. I don't want this level of hostility. I don't think it's necessary. I think there's a way. So what happens is, when we have the Dignity Index and it's 8-point scale, and people score themselves on it, and initially they think it's a tool for judging others, and then they find out it's a mirror for seeing themselves. Mm-hmm. And we see our own contempt. Exactly. Ouch. Right. We see our own contempt, And then we see, wow, I'm no better than the people I look down on. And then it's transformative.
Mm-hmm. That is so the work we need right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is exactly the direction we need to be headed. I hope that people can take that look at themselves, right? Because I think there's so much hurling that's happening. And when I've talked about this from a spiritual perspective, my response is always like, I don't want to minimize what people are going through because these times are they're trying.
Yes.
But taking the opportunity to use it as an invitation to look within. What is this stirring up for me? And how can I work through that is really what I think a lot of this is about. It is so stirring for people, but everybody's being stirred for a different reason. And why is everybody being stirred? What's their reason? What's their conditioning that's causing them to be stirred for this reason? And how can they go deeper into understanding themselves so they can meet today with less fear?
I agree completely that it's a big opportunity for insight into ourselves. If we stop looking at what's going on over there and start understanding the effect it has here, I agree. I agree with you totally.
So where can people find everything you're doing?
Okay. The Dignity Index, if you go to dignity.us, that's our website, and it'll introduce you, and you can sign up and get emails, and you can take the Dignity Pledge, which we've got some governors, U.S. governors, taking the Dignity Pledge and pledging to treat the other side with dignity no matter what. So we talk about facts, actions, decisions, outcomes. We try to find common ground. We try to look at our common interests and values and use it as a basis for cooperation. There's all these areas where we can move and agree on. So dignity.us, and then there's more about my book at tomrosshirt.com, and you can buy it online wherever you go to get your books.
Do you watch Bill Maher by any chance?
Sometimes, yeah, I do.
Did you see him this week? Did you watch it?
No, tell me what
It was really interesting because he went to the White House.
Right, I heard, yeah.
Yeah, and he did his book report, he called it, and he just presented like what happened. He didn't editorialize. He was like, this is what happened. And he just said, like, I wasn't gonna shun an invitation just because of who was inviting me. Like, I felt like this was a hand and I wanted to accept it. And he presented what happened. And I wanted to kind of look at the comments to see what people said, because that's really where the telling part is like how different people are responding to his presentation around literally, he said, I'm just going to report the facts of what happened. And you should watch it. It's really,
I'm going to look at, I will look. And I agree completely, because people would say, scream at him for going, you're just being used as a tool. They're manipulating you. And how can you be so naive?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Oh, it's fraught.
Yeah. I mean, in his first guest, like, who maybe Josh, hang on, what's his name? Josh Rogan.
Oh, of course, yes.
Not to be confused with Joe Rogan, two totally separate people. Josh Rogan came on, and the first thing he did was like go after him for it. You were used, and Bill Maher pushed back, and he was like, "You're sort of doing what I'm saying everybody's going to say I'm doing. I'm not doing that. I am literally just presenting what happened."
Well, Maher is, he's so valuable because he really is tired of the pieties from both sides. And he can sort of stand in the middle and not be aligned. And that's a valuable voice.
Yeah. And calls out everything, calls out both sides of everything. So, but as you're talking about this, that maybe he could get involved. I feel like he would be a good person to have. It's just like, let's just treat people with dignity and listen to what people have to say and form your own judgments without projecting all your stuff on it. But
well, one of the things people say is if they say something really contemptuous of the other side, because our view is it's contempt that causes disagreement, and that contempt that causes our division. And if people say, but I said what I said was true, and we're saying, look, even if what you say is factually true, and even if the cause is good, if you say it with contempt for the other side, you're increasing our divisions and reducing the chance that you'll ever get any of these aims that you have. And it takes a while to accept that point.
Mm-hmm. And I think that sort of too speaks to, if I'm remembering, it's been a long time since I looked at his work, but John Gottman's work.
Yes, John Gottman's work is inspiring for us.
Yeah.
And he makes the point again and again what contempt does to couples. Mm-hmm. But one of the quotes we love to make from him is, look, we got to disagree with each other. There's no value, where he says the couples that have contempt for each other, they're divorced in 5 years. But the couples who have no contempt because they don't have any hard conversation, they're finished in 10 years. Mm-hmm. And it's just the ones who have the hard conversations, but do it with respect. Right. They last a long time, right?
Right.
So one of his lines is, look, having fights and disagreements is not just human, it's humane.
Right. Right.
It's how we make things better. It's how we get to know each other. So, yeah, we got to have those fights.
Yeah, and I have these conversations with people all the time around their fear of conflict. And, I mean, again, this could be a whole other podcast, but talking with them about, like, where did that fear originate? How, what did you see? How was conflict worked through, resolved? Because it's often not the conflict that people fear. It's, what will people think about me? How will that conflict unfold? Can I honestly say what I need to say without being met with contempt for what I said?
And my fear, one of my fears about a hot debate is, am I going to lose my composure? Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if I get into something hot, am I going to suddenly take off after the person and then undercut the self-image of someone who's peaceful and is an emissary for social peace, and now you're just losing your head yelling at someone.
Right.
I guess we always kind of knew you were a fraud. That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and now, right, that you're like trying to embody this, but I think that's what makes you human, right? It's the ability to say, like, I'm chasing peace, but maybe part of my humanity is like, I'm not quite there yet. I feel that way too. I always say, like, I'm always a work in progress. Like, I don't sit on this, I don't have this microphone and preach like I know better than everybody else. I'm like, I'm working on me too every day. And every conversation I have I feel so blessed because it's an opportunity to also look at, oh, well, what is this speaking to you? Where is this speaking to you? Where might you be finding resistance around this? And what is the work I still need to do?
Right.
And maybe you too. Who knows?
The conversations are precious and irreplaceable. And,
Well, Tom, thank you so much. This was such an inspiring conversation. I love the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And if for people out there who are interested, the book is called Chasing Peace, A Story of Breakdowns, Breakthroughs, and the Spiritual Power of Neuroscience.
Thank you.
Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.